To all the skeptics in the comments, I promise this is my actual biological voice you're hearing, not an AI, it's 100% organic. I haven't had a firmware update in years. If you ever feel like an imposter at your job, if you've ever walked into a meeting, having done zero preparation, and hoped that your charisma would carry you through a PowerPoint presentation you haven't read, I want you to take a deep breath and think about Lucasfilm. Imagine for a moment that you have $4 billion. That is enough money to buy a fleet of private jets, a small European principality, or enough therapy to finally understand why your parents didn't love you. Disney, a company that usually calculates the ROI on every single napkin used in their theme parks, handed over that mountain of cash, and then apparently decided that having a plan was a bit too corporate for their taste. You'd think there'd be a vault somewhere in Burbank containing a leather-bound tome titled The Future of Star Wars, filled with intricate plot webs and character arcs that would make Shakespeare weep. Instead, it turns out, the master plan was essentially a communal sticky note in the break room that just said, make it look like the 70s and hope for the best. The level of administrative hubris required to wing a multi-billion-dollar trilogy is truly breathtaking. It's the cinematic equivalent of buying a Ferrari and then trying to assemble the engine using instructions for a Lego set from 1994. J.J. Abrams eventually came out and admitted that they didn't really have a map for where the story was going. They were just vibing. They were Star Wars vibing with your childhood and $4 billion of shareholder money. When you buy a company for that much, you usually have a spreadsheet, or at the very least, a basic understanding of who the main character's father is. But no, Disney treated the most valuable IP in history like a high-stakes game of Dungeons & Dragons, where the dungeon master keeps forgetting the names of the NPCs and just starts making up space magic rules as they go. The casual fan might look at the sleek posters and the shiny toys and think there was a grand design. They see the Lucasfilm story group and imagine a room full of lore experts meticulously ensuring that every laser blast aligns with 40 years of history. In reality, it was apparently just a group of people watching the clock and waiting for the next catering tray to arrive. It's an absolute masterclass in failure through success. They had all the resources in the world, the best talent, and a fan base that was practically begging to give them more money. And they decided to approach the narrative structure with the same level of foresight a toddler uses when deciding which wall to smear peanut butter on. They didn't just drop the ball, they bought the ball for $4 billion and then threw it into a wood chipper because mystery boxes are easier to write than actual plots. Imagine, if you will, the construction of a magnificent new skyscraper. The first architect comes in, full of nostalgia and lens flares, and builds 3 beautiful floors. It's got that classic feel, everything is retro, and there's a giant mystery hole in the middle of the lobby that he promises will lead to something amazing. Then he gets bored and leaves. The second architect arrives, looks at the mystery hole, decides it's subversive to just fill it with concrete, and builds the next 4 floors out of glass and existential dread. He hates the first architect's style, so he installs a staircase that leads to a wall and puts a no entry sign on the elevator. Finally, the first architect comes back for the penthouse, sees the glass nightmare, screams, and tries to turn the top floor back into a 70s style disco while the building is literally leaning over the side of a cliff. That is the sequel trilogy. It wasn't a collaboration. It was a 3-part argument where every director tried to fix what the last one ruined. You can almost hear the passive-aggressive sighs in the script meetings. It's the ultimate too many cooks in the kitchen scenario, except the cooks are also trying to poison each other's soup. We weren't watching a story unfold. We were watching a creative divorce play out in IMAX. The middle section, handled by Rian Johnson, didn't just move the story forward. It actively tried to dismantle the foundation of what Abrams built. It's like watching a relay race, where the first runner hands off the baton, and the second runner looks at it, calls it a cliché, and throws it into the stands while the crowd watches in horrified confusion. The sheer lack of an overarching narrative is a slap in the face to anyone who's ever sat through a basic intro to screenwriting class. You don't wing the middle act of a trilogy. That's where the meat is. That's where the stakes are raised. Instead, we got a movie that felt like it was written by someone who was tired of being told what to do by his older brother. The tonal whiplash gave the entire audience a collective case of cinematic vertigo. 1 minute, we're in a gritty war movie. The next, we're on a casino planet that looks like a discarded prequel set. And then we're back to, wait, who are the bad guys again? It's the sound of a billion-dollar company giving up on the concept of cohesion because they realized they could just sell more Porg plushies and the fans would still show up. Let's talk about Snoke. J.J. Abrams spent an entire movie setting this guy up as the new emperor. He's huge, literally, he's a giant hologram in the first movie, because nothing says I'm a big deal like being 50 feet tall. He's scarred, he's mysterious, he's wearing a gold bathrobe like he's a spacefaring Hugh Hefner. Fans spent 2 years writing 40,000-word Reddit theories about his origin. Is he Darth Plagueis? Is he a time-traveling Mace Windu? Is he the physical manifestation of the fans' disappointment? And then Rian Johnson walks in, looks at this looming threat, and says, what if he just died like a chump? In the middle of the second movie, Snoke gets sliced in half like a piece of premium deli ham. No backstory, no explanation. No, I am your father's accountant's roommate. Just zip, thud, and he's gone. It wasn't a shocking twist in the way The Empire Strikes Back was a twist. It was a, I don't know what to do with this character twist. It was the equivalent of a writer getting bored with a crossword puzzle and just burning the newspaper. The audience was left staring at the screen, wondering why they bothered caring about the Supreme Leader in the first place. If he was that easy to kill, how did he manage to build a giant planet-destroying laser without someone accidentally tripping over his power cord? The bait and switch with Snoke is the perfect microcosm of the sequel's structural rot. You can't build a villain for 2 years and then delete him without a satisfying payoff. That's not subverting expectations, that's narrative malpractice. It's like a mystery novel where the detective finds the body in chapter 1 and then spends the rest of the book talking about his feelings on space goats while the killer just leaves. It made the entire First Order look like a joke. Oh, our leader died. I guess we'll just follow this moody teenager with the helmet issues now. It was a betrayal of the audience's investment, a way of saying your theories are stupid and you should feel bad for having them. If there is one thing Star Wars loves more than beeping droids, it's a complicated family tree. We spent 2 solid years debating who Rey's parents were. J.J. Abrams practically looked into the camera in The Force Awakens and whispered, she's special, guys. Her parents are super important. Just wait. Then Rian Johnson comes along in The Last Jedi and tells her and us that her parents were filthy junk traders who sold her for drinking money and are buried in a pauper's grave in the desert. It was a bold choice. It said that anyone can be a hero. It was actually a decent bit of character development. But wait, there's more. J.J. Abrams comes back for the third movie, sees the nobody reveal, panics because he didn't get to use his mystery box, and says, actually, you're the granddaughter of the space pope. Yes, suddenly she's a Palpatine. It's the ultimate of storytelling. The parentage seesaw didn't just confuse the audience. It made the character of Rey feel like a pawn in a game of creative tug-of-war. One director wants her to be a self-made hero, the other wants her to have royal space blood, and the result is a character whose identity changes based on who was holding the pen that Tuesday. This isn't how you write a protagonist. This is how you write a Mad Libs page. Rey is the daughter of noun and famous character. It undermined every emotional beat of the second movie. Why bother with the you come from nothing speech if you're just going to retract it 2 hours later? It's the sound of a studio desperately trying to course correct based on Twitter feedback, instead of following a vision. They treated the fans like they were goldfish, with 5-second memories, hoping we wouldn't notice that the grand revelation of the third movie completely invalidated the grand revelation of the second. The ending of The Force Awakens was a masterclass in building hype. Rey climbs a mountain, finds the legendary Luke Skywalker, and offers him his old lightsaber in a moment of silent epic destiny. The music swells, the camera circles, and the credits roll. We waited 2 years to see what Luke would say. Would he give her a wise speech? Would he begin her training immediately? No. In the first 10 seconds of The Last Jedi, Luke takes the saber, looks at it with the boredom of a man receiving a junk mail flyer, and chucks it over his shoulder into the dirt. That wasn't just Luke rejecting the saber. That was Rian Johnson rejecting J.J. Abrams. It was a $200 million middle finger aimed directly at the guy who wrote the previous scene. For a casual viewer, it was a moment of wait, what? For a fan, it was the moment they realized the people making these movies didn't even like each other's work. It broke the internal logic of the universe. This wasn't the Luke Skywalker we knew. It was a grumpy hermit who seemed more interested in drinking green milk directly from a space walrus than in saving the galaxy. It's one thing to subvert expectations, but it's another to treat the previous movie's cliffhanger like a punchline to a bad joke. It's like a relay race where the first runner hands off the baton and the second runner uses it to beat the first runner over the head before running in the opposite direction. It made the entire quest to find Luke feel like a giant waste of time. Why did we spend an entire movie looking for a map to this guy if he was just going to be a jerk who throws away the most iconic weapon in cinematic history? It was a moment of pure cynical deconstruction that served no purpose, other than to tell the audience that the things they cared about were actually kind of lame. Then we get to the grand finale, The Rise of Skywalker, the movie that gave us the most legendary "I give up" line in history. Somehow, Palpatine returned. that somehow is doing more heavy lifting than the entire CGI department. It is the sound of a billion-dollar company throwing its hands in the air and admitting they have no idea what they're doing. They killed the villain in the second movie. They didn't have a plan for a new one, so they just dug up the old guy and hoped the nostalgia would keep the fans from asking questions. It's the cinematic equivalent of I forgot my homework, so here's a drawing of a dinosaur. The Ferrari analogy is the only one that fits. Disney spent $4 billion on a pristine, high-performance Italian sports car. Then, instead of hiring a professional driver, they put 3 different people in the front seat, all of whom had different ideas of where they were going. One wanted to go to the track, one wanted to go off-roading, and one just wanted to drive back to 1977. They all fought over the steering wheel while the car was doing 90 miles per hour, and eventually the car just flew off a cliff. The third movie isn't a film, it's a poverty of imagination masked by shiny explosions and fast editing. Pivoting is a word businesses use when they've made a massive mistake and don't want to admit it. Lucasfilm didn't just pivot, they spun in circles until they vomited. Bringing back Palpatine wasn't a masterstroke. It was a desperate Hail Mary from a studio that realized they'd reached the end of the trilogy without a villain or a coherent ending. It's the sound of a billion-dollar brand crashing into reality. They had all the money, all the power, and all the legacy, and they traded it all in for a series of movies that feel like they were written by an algorithm that was malfunctioning. It's a tragedy wrapped in a blockbuster, a reminder that no amount of money can buy a good story if you don't have a plan to tell one. If you're going to spend $4 billion on a franchise, maybe hire a guy with a notebook to write down what happens in the third act before you start filming the first. Just a thought.